I was born a slave with no voice, no future, and no right to even look at the holy world above me. But everything changed the day I met Sister Helena, a 51-year-old nun who should have never looked at me twice. One forbidden glance turned into a secret that shattered the entire monastery. When she became pregnant, they called it a curse, but she called it a divine blessing. Now the order is burning, Father Marcus wants me dead, and I am trapped between guilt, truth, and a destiny I never chose. I was born into chains and I never knew freedom. My name is Daniel, and I served in the estate of a powerful religious order. Every day I worked in silence, obeying without question. "Move faster, Daniel," a guard shouted. "You think this is a resting place?" "Yes, sir," I said, lowering my head. My world was built on fear. I learned early that speaking too much brought pain. "Why are you always quiet?" my fellow slave Joran whispered one night. "Because silence keeps me alive," I told him. He laughed softly. "One day silence won't save you." The monastery near the estate was called holy, but I never felt holiness there. I only felt control. One morning a guard came to me. "You are needed in the gardens. Don't delay." "Yes, sir," I replied quickly. As I entered the monastery grounds, I heard birds and wind. It felt different from the fields. "Keep your head down," the guard warned me. "And never speak unless spoken to." I nodded. Then I saw her. Sister Helena stood near the garden wall. She looked older, powerful, but tired. Her eyes followed me. "Who is that boy?" she asked softly. I froze. "That is Daniel," the guard answered quickly. "Just a slave." "I can hear you," I said quietly before I could stop myself. The guard grabbed my arm. "Be silent." But Sister Helena raised her hand. "Let him speak." I looked at her. My heart raced. "Do you like working here?" she asked me. I hesitated. "I don't have a choice." She stared at me for a long moment. "No one here truly does." The air felt heavy. Later, Father Marcus arrived. "Do not interact with her," he warned me. "Understand?" "Yes," I said. But as I left, I heard her voice again. "Daniel?" That was the first time someone said my name like I mattered. And I knew my life would never stay the same. I stood still even after I left the garden gates. "Boy," a guard barked, "stop dreaming and move." "Yes, sir," I answered. My mind kept repeating her voice. "Daniel?" She had said it like I was not invisible. That night Joran asked me, "You look different. What happened?" "Nothing," I lied. He frowned. "Careful, Daniel. Curiosity gets people killed here." I stared at the ceiling of the slave quarters. "If I disappear," I whispered, "no one will even notice." But deep inside I knew someone already had noticed me. And that scared me more than anything. The next morning I was sent back to the monastery. "Stay focused," Father Marcus warned me. "No mistakes." "Yes, sir," I replied. But as I walked into the gardens, I felt her presence again. Sister Helena stood far away watching. She whispered, "Daniel?" I lowered my head, but my heart was no longer quiet. I wanted to run, but I stayed because something inside me refused to leave her sight. I could not explain what was happening to me yet. My work in the monastery gardens became daily. I tried to stay invisible, but Sister Helena kept watching from the balcony. At first I thought it was coincidence. But soon I noticed patterns. She came out whenever I worked. One guard said, "Keep moving, slave." I replied, "Yes, sir." But I always felt her eyes on me. One afternoon everything changed. "Boy, what is your name?" she asked softly. "Daniel," I replied, eyes down. She stayed silent for a moment. "Your work is too hard for someone your age," she said. I didn't answer because slaves were not allowed to speak freely. Father Marcus suddenly appeared. "Step away from her," he ordered sharply. He grabbed my arm and pulled me back. "Do not speak to her again," he warned me. I nodded quickly. But she called out softly, "Daniel?" Hearing my name made my heart stop. Later that night, Father Marcus came again. "Stay away from her," he said. "She is power itself." I asked, "Why does she look at me like that?" "Because she can destroy you," he replied. That warning stayed in my mind. I returned to the quarters confused. Joran asked, "What happened today?" I said, "Nothing." "You look different," he said. I turned away and stayed silent. That night I could not sleep. Her voice kept repeating in my head. "Daniel, Daniel?" I whispered, "Why me?" The ceiling of the slave quarters felt heavier than usual. I told myself it meant nothing. But my heart refused to agree. The next morning I returned to the gardens. She was there again watching from above. "Daniel?" I looked down immediately. A guard whispered, "Don't look up." I said, "I am not." But I was lying to myself. Her presence followed me everywhere that day. Even the wind felt different. At midday she called me again. "Daniel, come closer." My legs froze. The guard stepped forward, but she stopped him. "Let him come," she said firmly. I walked slowly toward the balcony. My heart was beating too fast. "Do you fear me?" she asked. I said, "I fear everything here." She nodded slowly. "Good," she said. "Fear keeps you alive." I didn't understand her words, but I couldn't stop thinking about them. Later, Father Marcus pulled me aside again. "You are being watched," he said. "By whom?" I asked. "By everyone," he replied. That night felt heavier than all others. I lay awake staring at the ceiling. Her voice came again in my thoughts. "Daniel?" I whispered, "Stop." But it didn't stop. Something dangerous had begun inside me. The next day I avoided her eyes. But I still felt them watching me. "Boy, focus on your work," a guard shouted. I said, "I am focused." But my voice shook. Later I passed near the chapel wall. She was there waiting silently. "Daniel," she said again. I stopped walking. For the first time I didn't run away. I asked softly, "Why do you call me?" "Because you are real," she said. I didn't know what she meant, but I felt something breaking inside me. I stepped back slowly, and I heard her whisper my name again. I turned away but could not forget her. That was the moment everything changed for me. Forever changed. I was sent to the inner chapel during a heavy storm. The monastery felt empty, silent, almost sacred, and I thought I was alone. But Sister Helena was there waiting. She stood near the candles, her face pale in the dim light. In that moment she looked more human than holy. I said quickly, "You shouldn't be here." She replied softly, "I know, but I needed to see you without eyes watching." My chest tightened and I didn't understand what she meant. She walked closer toward me slowly. "Do you think I chose this life?" she asked me. "Do you think I wanted to become what I am?" I stayed silent because I had no answer. She laughed bitterly. "No one chooses anything here, not you, not me." Her voice echoed in the empty chapel like a wound opening. I whispered that I didn't understand what was happening to me. She stepped closer again. "You are not blind, Daniel," she said softly. I stepped back but my feet refused to move properly. The storm outside grew louder against the chapel walls. I felt like the air inside me was breaking apart. She whispered my name again and I almost answered without thinking. I said, "Please stop," but my voice sounded weak. She looked at me like she already knew everything I would become. I felt something inside me shift in a way I could not control. I turned toward the door trying to leave before it was too late. But she said, "Daniel, do not run from what is real." I stopped without realizing why I obeyed her voice. I asked her why she was doing this to me. She answered, "Because you are the only one who sees me." I didn't know what that meant, but it terrified me. The candles flickered as if the chapel itself was listening. I stepped out into the rain feeling like my old life was gone. When I left the chapel I knew I could never return the same. I stood outside breathing heavily as the storm hit my face. I told myself nothing had changed, but I knew I was lying. The chapel doors behind me felt like they were closing my past forever. I whispered I will never understand what happened inside there. But I knew something inside me had already changed permanently. The wind carried her voice back to me one last time. "Daniel," she called softly even though I was far away. I covered my ears but I could still hear her. And I realized I was no longer the same person who entered. I walked away from the monastery knowing my life had broken in half. I did not look back even once. Because if I did I knew I would never leave. The storm swallowed everything behind me as I kept walking. I felt my identity slipping away from what I used to be. I whispered again that I was free even though I didn't believe it. Her name echoed inside my mind like a warning I couldn't erase. I kept walking into the dark road ahead. Each step felt like leaving a part of myself behind forever. I did not know who I would become after this night. But I knew I could never go back to who I was. I walked forward into an unknown life ahead. I was sent to the inner chapel during a heavy storm. The monastery felt empty, silent, almost sacred, and I thought I was alone. But Sister Helena was there waiting. She stood near the candles, her face pale in the dim light. In that moment she looked more human than holy. I said quickly, "You shouldn't be here." She replied softly, "I know, but I needed to see you without eyes watching." My chest tightened and I didn't understand what she meant. She walked closer toward me slowly. "Do you think I chose this life?" she asked me. "Do you think I wanted to become what I am?" I stayed silent because I had no answer. She laughed bitterly. No one chooses anything here, not you, not me. Her voice echoed in the empty chapel like a wound opening. I whispered, I don't understand what is happening to me. She stepped closer again. You are not blind, Daniel, she said softly. I stepped back, but my feet refused to move properly. The storm outside grew louder against the chapel walls. She whispered my name again and I almost answered without thinking. I said, please stop, but my voice sounded weak. She looked at me like she already knew everything I would become. I turned toward the door trying to leave before it was too late. But she said, Daniel, do not run from what is real. I stopped without realizing why I obeyed her voice. I asked her why she was doing this to me. She answered, because you are the only one who sees me. I didn't know what that meant, but it terrified me. The candles flickered as if the chapel itself was listening. I stepped out into the rain feeling like my old life was gone. When I left the chapel, I knew I could never return the same. I stood outside breathing heavily as the storm hit my face. I told myself nothing had changed, but I knew I was lying. The chapel doors behind me felt like they were closing my past forever. I whispered, I will never understand what happened inside there. But I knew something inside me had already changed permanently. The wind carried her voice back to me one last time. Daniel, she called softly even though I was far away. I covered my ears, but I could still hear her. And I realized I was no longer the same person who entered. I walked away from the monastery knowing my life had broken in half. I did not look back even once, because if I did, I knew I would never leave. The storm swallowed everything behind me as I kept walking. I felt my identity slipping away from what I used to be. I whispered again that I was free even though I didn't believe it. Her name echoed inside my mind like a warning I couldn't erase. I kept walking into the dark road ahead. Each step felt like leaving a part of myself behind forever. I did not know who I would become after this night, but I knew I could never go back to who I was. I walked forward into an unknown life ahead. I was in the monastery when everything broke into chaos. People were shouting everywhere. Cursed, someone yelled. Slave corrupted her, another voice screamed. I pressed my back against the cold stone wall and said, I didn't do anything. But no one listened. Guards grabbed me roughly. Move, one of them shouted. I said, where are you taking me? To judgment, he replied. Father Marcus stood in front of me with burning eyes. Confess, he shouted. You seduced Sister Helena. I shook my head. I didn't choose any of this. He hit me across the face. Liar. I fell to my knees. Please, I'm telling the truth. The crowd kept shouting. Punish him. Cleanse him. I heard their voices like knives. Days passed like that. Pain, questions, silence, then pain again. Then I heard something new. A guard whispered near my cell, she is speaking now. I asked, Helena? He nodded. She told the council the child is a divine blessing. I whispered, that will make things worse. He said, it already has. The elders gathered. I was dragged to witness her words. She stood in white robes, pale but steady. She is possessed, someone said. No, another said, she is lying. Helena raised her voice. This child is not sin. It is blessing. The hall erupted. Blasphemy, someone shouted. I whispered, why are you doing this? She looked at me and said, because it is true. Later I was thrown back into a cell. A guard came at night. Run, he whispered. They will kill you. I said, why help me? He replied, because I still believe you didn't choose this. The door opened. I stepped out but didn't run. I walked to Helena's chamber. She saw me and said, you should have left. I said, I needed to see you. She shook her head. They are coming for both of us. I asked, what about the child? She placed her hand on her stomach. My fate is already written. I whispered, I feel like I caused this. She said, no. You are just the storm they needed. I stood there unable to breathe properly. For the first time I felt completely powerless. I whispered, I never wanted any of this. The guard who helped me returned. He said, you need to leave now. I asked, and you? He said, don't think about me. I felt my hands shaking. I said, this is all my fault. He replied, it is not. The hallway echoed with distant screams. I looked back once and saw Helena's face in the window. She mouthed my name. I stopped breathing. I whispered, I am sorry, but she did not respond. The guard pulled me away. I said, why is this happening to us? He said, because truth destroys lies. I walked faster through the rain outside. The monastery behind me was burning. I felt my life breaking again. I said, I am still a slave inside, but no one answered. I kept walking until my legs gave out. I lay down and said, I don't know who I am anymore. The storm covered my voice. I closed my eyes and remembered her words again. Daniel, she had said like a curse. I opened my eyes and realized I could never go back again. I ran through the burning monastery, chaos screaming everywhere. He is here, someone shouted. I whispered, I didn't do anything. Father Marcus' voice echoed, find the slave. I kept running through the forest, mud hitting my feet. A guard yelled, stop him. I gasped, why is this happening to me? My chest burned as I ran deeper into the trees. I heard Helena's voice in my mind saying my name again and again. Daniel, I whispered, I can't forget her. I hid behind a broken stone wall, breathing hard. One guard passed saying, the order is collapsing. Another replied, she is the curse. I said quietly, no, she is not. My hands were shaking. I asked myself, did I cause all this? I pressed my head to the ground. I just worked in the gardens, I said softly. Night fell and I stayed hidden under rain. A voice behind me said, you are alive. I turned and saw a runaway servant. He said, they are killing everyone. I replied, I don't know what to do. He said, run or die. I whispered, I am already dead inside. The monastery fires lit the sky red. I watched everything burn and said, this is my fault. The servant shook his head, no, it is theirs. I closed my eyes, remembering Helena saying, truth cannot be buried. I said, then why does it destroy everything? Days passed hiding in silence, eating nothing, surviving fear. I kept hearing Marcus shouting, confess, in my head. I said, I should go back. The servant said, you will die. I replied, maybe I deserve it. He grabbed my arm, don't be stupid. I pulled away, I need answers. I stood up in the rain and said, I will return. The forest felt like it was watching me. I whispered, I am no longer a slave or free. I walked back toward the burning ruins, knowing nothing would ever be the same again. I stopped near the river and said, what am I becoming? The water did not answer. I heard distant shouting behind me. He is still alive. I whispered, they will never stop chasing me. The servant caught up and said, you need to disappear. I replied, I already did. He looked at me and said, then who are you now? I stayed silent. My voice finally broke, I don't know. The wind moved through the trees like judgment. I said, if I return I may die. The servant said, if you don't others will die. I clenched my fists, so I am trapped either way. He nodded. I looked at the burning sky and whispered, Helena, I don't know what you did to me. Silence followed. I said, but I cannot run forever. I turned toward the ruins again. I said, if I die then so be it. The servant said, you are choosing pain. I replied, I am choosing truth. I walked forward without looking back anymore at all. No turning back now ever. I walked back into the burning remains of the monastery as dawn rose. Everything was silent. Helena was there sitting calmly among the ruins. You came back, she said. I couldn't live running forever, I replied. Father Marcus appeared behind broken walls. He looked defeated. The order was gone. This ends now, he said weakly. But no one had power anymore. Helena stood up slowly. Daniel, you shouldn't have come, she said. There is no end, only truth, she added. I looked at her, then at the collapsing walls of the life I once knew. I'm no longer a slave, I whispered. But I am not free either, I said. Marcus screamed, blasphemy, stop this now. I said, there is nothing left to end. Helena whispered, it already ended when you looked at me. I walked away from the ruins as the wind carried away the ashes of everything I had ever known. Marcus shouted, broken walls, Daniel, stop this, he is not finished yet. I turned and said, there is nothing left for me to lose. Helena stepped closer and whispered, you already lost everything inside you. I asked her, why did you choose me? She replied, because you were the only one who did not look away. Marcus screamed, blasphemy, stop this now. I said, I am already beyond your judgment. Helena touched my hand and said, you are free in the worst way. I whispered, then I have nothing left to fear. The monastery finally collapsed behind us as fire consumed the last walls. I kept walking without looking back even when I heard my name again. Helena whispered, Daniel, stay if you still believe in anything. I said, only truth now. And for the first time in my life I belonged to nothing.